Hi, and welcome to week 4 of your Troy University Literature course. Just to let you know, on Sunday, September 7th, the midterm will be opening up through ProctorU, so please make sure that you have that all set up. It will stay open through, let me see and make sure, it will stay open through week 5, and also it will be open until September 19th at 11:30 p.m. So that is your midterm. As far as your assignments go for week 4, you are going to be doing, of course, a bit of reading. We'll be looking at modernism, particularly poetry. We'll be reading Marianne Moore's poetry, Ezra Pound's In a Station of the Metro, and River Merchant's Wife, plus his poem, You Sewin Mobberly. And we will be reading T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Even though it's poetry, it's very dense poetry, so I highly recommend that you get started a bit earlier on this than you might expect. And then, of course, there's a podcast on plot. As far as the work goes for last week, I think you guys did a fantastic job of engaging. Tammy mentioned that naturalism in literature was used during the 1880s to the 1940s to convey how social conditions, heredity, and environment shaped a person's character. And in her post, she did a good job of engaging Up From Slavery and the Souls of Black Folk, really to kind of engage those naturalist tendencies. Natala Bueno mentioned that naturalism is the depiction of the effect that life and the role environment have on characters. And also, Natalia was really good because she mentioned the role that chance plays, which is very key. Naturalism also, she mentioned, found heroism in the everyday man and woman, which is true. Cynthia Sitka mentioned that Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper was an interesting read for her, and that it chronicled this mental illness and this journey this woman went through. And she really also enjoyed, Cynthia enjoyed reading Gilman's piece on why she wrote The Yellow Wallpaper. I think that is a key element. Shannon Ewing also mentioned that naturalism was a literary movement that used complete practicality to suggest social situations, heredity, and surroundings, which I think is also a good point, that Tony Randall then picked up when he looked in Washington's Up From Slavery and Du Bois' The Souls of Black Folk, that he wrote that he found naturalism to take a different turn. The notion of fictitious characters versus real-world experience, and I think that that's a good point to make, that this kind of naturalist tendency also operated in the nonfiction world too. Michael Steele wrote that naturalism specifically addressed the human condition with a focus on the thoughts and feelings of the individual characters and their interactions. And he brought up the notion of the yellow wallpaper and the open boat jostling these feelings, which I think is a very key element. Christopher Clare mentioned that the open boat was more of a battle between man and nature, and of course the adaptation of man based on these surroundings and what he or she had to deal with. The story for Christopher provided more of a sense of naturalism in his opinion due to the naturalistic effects of the environment, which I think is a very key point to mention, the role that the environment plays in the social determinism that operates within these stories. Christina Knuckles mentioned that in Chapter 1 of W.E.B. Du Bois' The Souls of Black Folks, that he addresses this color line, and she did a really great reading, Christina did, on this notion of the color line in Du Bois, but also brought in some of Washington's counterpoints to Du Bois, which was very good. Franklin Brown mentioned that naturalistic writings will use the human emotions that everyday life are filled with at its very core, and that the reader will then use this emotion as a connection to kind of put themselves in the character's place. And this notion of the ability to see oneself, to have this empathy, is key. Ralph Hornsby mentioned that after reading the overview, he applied what Donald Pfizer defined about the subject matter and the focus on lower and middle classes, and then took that as a sense to kind of explore the yellow wallpaper, and of course to kind of think about notions of femininity and recovery. Darcella Marshall mentioned that naturalism stems from realism, which is true. Naturalism characterizes the subject as they appear in everyday life, often, yes, negative, as Darcella mentions, but this kind of objective, scientific, deterministic manner. Lauren F. mentioned, as much as I love a good fiction story, I love something that is rooted in the real, the raw, and the truth, and that this is one of the reasons why Lauren really did enjoy naturalism, because of its non-sugar-coated look into what it could really be. Brittany Salmon mentioned that she enjoyed Booker T. Washington's Up from Slavery, this kind of very interesting, inspiring, personal story, and that, how he then rose to become one of African Americans' most influential intellectuals. Carolyn Blocker mentioned that The Open Moat, written by Stephen Crane, exemplifies naturalism, which it does, in that the characters display humanistic behaviors when faced with life or death. Which Holly Autry also mentioned, in light that naturalism is demonstrated throughout the story when the narrator's husband brushes off the feelings. And of course, she's talking about the yellow wallpaper, which is key. Robert Shelton wrote, in relation to Gilman's Why I Wrote the Yellow Wallpaper, that Gilman herself was writing this to kind of break the cycle of insanity that she felt closing in, and that this was a way that she was addressing it. Jamelia Coleman mentioned that in Du Bois' From the Souls of Black Folk, that there was this problem with the color line, which was mentioned before, which was great. And that she also brought up the faith of our fathers as a good quote. This idea of the veil coming kind of unreconciled blindness, I think, is a key element to naturalism. Overall, though, I think all of you did a good job of engaging the literature and also thinking about how it functions. That is the big thing with naturalism, and of course when we get to modernism it's going to be very large, is figuring out how it functions. Anyway, I look forward to seeing your work on Unit 4 and of course seeing your midterms as they come in. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thanks.